Mateo, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, maybe just to start off, would love to learn more about you. Where did you grow up? You're obviously working with your brother on Lula today. We'd love to hear more about the origin story and how you guys started Lula.
Yeah, for sure. So we have a funny story because when we grew up in Miami, so when most people think about Miami, they think about growing up on the beach, boats, all that. We grew up on a small farm, and so our background was a bit different: goats, chicken, horses, all of that. And
Oh wow.
growing up, I never really cared to start my own business. So for me, I wanted to go work on Wall Street. I remember one of my ex girlfriends, her cousin worked on Wall Street, and I remember hearing him making $125,000 coming straight out of college, and I was like, I'm gonna go do that, and I'm gonna be rich like him. And so that was my entire dream. I want to go work on Wall Street, and so when I got to college, I went to Babson for finance. I didn't even realize Babson's such a good entrepreneurship program when I applied.
Oh
And
wow.
then once I got to Babson, um, I didn't know what APIs were. I didn't know what tech was or anything like that. Like I was always just so focused on going the finance route. And then there was one night my brother and I wanted Papa John's pizza, but they wouldn't deliver to Wellesley, Massachusetts. And so we ordered from one of the local pizza shops. And when he walked outside, he saw the parking lot packed to capacity, and he thought, "Wow, it'd be really cool if we could rent another student's car to go pick up the pizza." And then when he came back, he mentioned the idea to me, and I was like, "Let's build it. We're both new here at Babson. We don't really have much to do. Why not?" And so I literally just remember going to the Harvard bookstore, and I would go every Saturday and I would read their CS books. And that was originally how I learned how to code. And then, because we weren't venture backed, we didn't have money to go raise for people to build it. And then the other thing that happened was every like Tuesday or Thursday, I would take the train into Cambridge, and I'd come with my laptop, and I'd go to like some of the code meetups, and I would ask the students like, "Hey, can you help me with this integration, or can you help me with this bug, whatever?" And that was literally how I learned how to code. And that was originally how we started the first business, which was LULARides. And that was an app that college students could rent cars from other students to go do whatever they really wanted. And that was like my foray into the world of tech and entrepreneurship. It was not something that I cared to do. It was one of those situations where life had plans that were different from yours.
That's awesome. Actually, one of the things I was really curious about is, like, to your point, Babson's very well known for the entrepreneurship stuff, and something I admire about it. It seems to actually genuinely foster that within its curriculum or in the community itself. Whereas Stanford, for example, like well known for entrepreneurship, but I don't feel like sometimes the school is like all that supportive, or they're supportive sometimes or selectively. But it seems like Babson has a very kind of all-encompassing kind of supportive community for entrepreneurship. Did you find that to be true when you were there, or how much did that impact you and inspire you to kind of pursue Lula?
Yeah, Babson honestly could not do a better job of encouraging entrepreneurship than they do. So like your first year, everybody's required to take a course where they essentially start a business, and you learn all the nuances of working with. You learn like the importance of choosing good co-founders, because you're stuck with just random classmates. You're focused on what the unit economics are, what manufacturing is. So they really push that from the day you get there. But in my case, one of the things that was really interesting was my brother and I, nobody in our family when we got to Babson had ever graduated from college. And so that was always a dream of ours. And when we were going through the process of trying to decide, like, are we going to drop out or not? The thing that acted as a catalyst for that was we had been invited to apply to the TO fellowship. And even though we didn't end up going through with it, we had applied. And I remember my dad having the moment where, like, I don't necessarily like your car sharing idea, but if Peter Thiel's people are paying attention to it, like, it might be worth pursuing full time. And when we started thinking about it more and more, I remember going to the dean of students at Babson, and I asked him straight up. I was like, "Look, this is the opportunity that we have, blah blah." And I'll never forget, he was the one that told me, he's like, "Hey, Babson will still be here around a year or two from now if you ultimately decide to come back. This business opportunity might not. Go for it." And I thought that was like the most ridiculous thing ever, that like somebody from the side of academia was encouraging that, but it speaks volumes of Babson. And the other really cool thing is what I've heard oftentimes when people drop out of the school, it's like there's immediately this stark disconnect between the school and the dropout, like, hey, you didn't finish the school, you can't get access to the library or whatever. Babson was phenomenal because they actually gave us workspace on campus. So we were still going to campus every single day. It was great because I was still able to see all my friends every day. I was working in the entrepreneurship center. So I was working alongside all the other Babson entrepreneurs that were either current students or alumni. And the other thing that Babson did really great was they gave you a lot of resources for no cost. So like they would have lawyers come in that were working pro bono to help you set up your LLC or your C corp or whatever. They were having they had resources. So like if you needed your first NDA, if you needed your first type of contract, whatever, they would give you the resources so you can go out and attain those. And then if you were one of the companies that like decided to go all in and you were showcasing how serious you were, then they did an incredible job of putting you in front of alumni and prospective partners for your business. And so they could not have been any better in terms of their support and their encouragement.
That really is rare. That is the perfect anecdote because not to throw Stanford under the bus, but that is literally the exact opposite of how they treat dropouts. It's much more, I wouldn't say, actively antagonistic, but you do lose access and privileges and all of that. And I feel like that's their way of kind of keeping people from dropping out and pursuing those things. So that's amazing. That's really interesting. I did not realize that. Very cool.
Yeah.
And also the other thing that came to mind when you were telling your story is Leora and I always joke that, and I'm definitely susceptible, or I've done this myself, is usually when students start companies, it's always to solve a problem that they have, which ironically yours also stemmed from that, but it turned into like a true legitimate business and not just kind of a, I don't know, small thing that ends up flopping, which I have done before. I'm really curious. Like the other thing I read about the LULARides business is that you guys started at Babson, obviously, but then expanded very quickly to 500 campuses. What was that journey like, or how did you manage to kind of grow so quickly across so many places?
that that was an interesting experience because, and this is where we really started to learn about the importance of getting to know your market and doing the research and all that, because when we launched on Babson, it was September 1st, 2018. And I remember telling my mom the night before we launched and we went live, I was like, if we end up on 25 campuses in year one, I'll consider it a success. And we launched the first 2 days, we got maybe 3 signups. It was horrible. And I remember I had I had to go pick up something at one of my buddies' dorm rooms at like 2 o'clock in the at night one time. And I remember driving back to my apartment and looking at the Babson parking lot. I remember getting emotional and like essentially crying because I was like, I spent all my time doing this. I dropped out. Am I stupid? Like, am I stupid for dropping out and giving up this incredible opportunity at Babson when there's hundreds of cars in this parking lot and not a single person on this campus, unless they were like a good friend of ours, is signing up for the app? And a couple of days later, we ended up getting featured on, it wasn't Barstool Sports, but it was a Barstool equivalence for the Northeast. And it was on schools, like it was a page that catered towards the state schools in the Northeast, so like UMass Amherst and all of those. And as soon as we got put in front of the eyes of state schools, that's where everything went crazy for us. So, mind you, third day, I'm crying because we get no users. By the eighth day, we had we had become a top 100 app on the App Store. We had surpassed basically our year one projection in terms of users. And a lot of that stemmed from the fact that had gotten featured on this Instagram page for one of these Barstool like pages. And what we started to realize when we looked at the data was that the schools we were getting a bunch of downloads and usage from were state schools. And when we started looking deeper into the data, one of the things we realized was a school like Babson was horrible for us because 70% of Babson students paid full tuition. And Babson was a private school. So if you had kids coming from families dropping 70 grand a year, they realistically probably did not want to rent out their nice Mercedes, or they didn't really care if they're going to save $10 on a drive. They can just Uber. Whereas the kids on state schools, it was the inverse. 70% of them were on financial aid. So if you could provide a way for them to make easy money, or if you could provide a way for them to save money, it was night and day difference. And so we started just focusing specifically on state schools. And this is one of the other things that gets really interesting is we started paying a lot of attention to the Tinder playbook. And I don't know if you have ever read the story of Whitney Wolf. She was originally one of the people early at Tinder. Something happens there and she goes off into Bumble. And what allowed her to build such an incredible brand for both companies was going to all the Greek life and essentially sponsoring different events and having them throw parties that required people to get to download the app. And so we tried going that same route, but we didn't have the budget to beat Tinder and Bumble and all the other companies trying to buy the sororities and the Greek life. So the next thing we did was like, I'm Puerto Rican and Cuban. I remember on one of the campuses, I saw there was a Puerto Rican association. So I reached out to the Puerto Rican group. And sure enough, they weren't asking for fat budgets or anything like that. They were just asking us to be able to have have their members be brand ambassadors and get something for their resume. And then they connected us with another association, which was like the African American Association. And then one of the other things that ends up allowing us to essentially continue going viral, is we start working with a lot of these minority focused groups. And what we realized was that they often felt like they were being ignored by the startups going on campus. And so if you were one of the few startups that gave them the attention, more so gave them the opportunity to do something, they were going to be your number one brand ambassadors and they were going to be the ones that vouch for you. And so that was really how it was that we went viral. We got featured on one of those pages, realized state schools was where it was at. And then we realized that we could dig into these specialty groups and they would essentially let it go viral within their own networks just naturally. And we ended up going and having members of more than 500 campuses within like 4 or 5 months, something crazy like that.
Wow, that's super cool. That's amazing and very, yeah, to your point, not something I would have intuitively thought before. Because so many people try that campus playbook and fail. And to your point, I think it's more because people compete rather than finding their own kind of unique way. And that's incredible. Very, very cool.
Yeah. You're extremely scrappy. I mean, you taught yourself how to code. You're kind of finding, in terms of the sorority and fraternity playbook, to Steph's point, like you found, a door blocked and you realized another door would open. Just curious, like when you're talking to founders, and we'll get to the Lula of today's story in a bit, a lot of them, may not have like that level of scrappiness. So like, I don't know, like, how do you think about like giving advice to founders, especially when, you've obviously proven that you kind of could do a lot with very little at the beginning. So like, how do you think about like scrappiness as a virtue of a founder? And do you think it can be taught, or do you think it just is innate?
Yeah, I think it's taught, and I think it's something that's learned. Like I'm naturally not anymore because I've learned and I've overcome it. But naturally, I was one of the most shy people when I was growing up, and so a lot of this stuff, going out and talking to people, if somebody remembered me from elementary school, they would have been like, "There's no way that he's doing this now." And so I think a lot of it was just learned, and I think a lot of it just comes from my parents. Like my mom was very much one of those people. I was like, "Oh, you want an Xbox? Go figure out how you're gonna get it." And so I'd look at all my resources and be like, well, there's a big avocado tree outside. Maybe I can just pick the avocados and go sell it in like one of the local shopping malls or something like that. And so I think I think my scrappiness was taught from my parents. They're like, hey, if you want something, nobody's gonna come around and give it to you. Like you're gonna have to go get it for yourself. And that was very much the approach that we had for this stuff. So like when we had the idea for the app, I had already grown up in an environment where I was used to wanting to get something and having to figure out how I was going to go get it. And so, like, when I had the idea for the app, it was like, okay, I might as well build it. When it came time to do our first sales calls, it was like, all right, nobody's going to sell the first million in ARR, or the first 5 or 10, whatever. Like, I might as well go figure out how to do it myself. And I think that's one of the things that most startups fail at is they don't have the scrappiness. And I think between everything that happened in the market the last couple of years, there was essentially an overabundance of capital and resources. And I actually think that hurt startups. A lot of startups immediately equated raising capital to having PMF. And so they lost that scrappy nature. One of the reasons that I'm so excited that it's harder to come across capital today is because I think that's going to actually push founders to be even better than they would have been if they were given access to easy money early on. And it's going to force them to learn a lot of the lessons that I learned early on. Like, I think the greatest thing that ever happened to me was that I got rejected by the first 531 out of the first 532 investors I reached out to. Like, I think that gave me my massive advantage. And I think having to do stuff like sell avocados to get my first Xbox helped me too. And so all that to say, I think the scrappiness is definitely learned. I was not somebody that had this innate ability to go talk to people early on. Like, I can't overstate it. I was so shy growing up.
Hmm. I was actually curious. The other thing that stood out to me when I was reading about you guys is obviously your co-founders, your twin brother. I'm curious, like how similar or different are you guys? People always talk about like complementary, co-founders, and it's just ironic that you guys are twins. How do you guys divvy up responsibility, and how would you guys describe, your personalities, I guess, in relation to each
I
other?
think I think we're very polar opposites, which is funny because if you get us both in a cap and long hair, most people say we probably look identical. But I think we were really great for each other. So for instance, I'm much more product and technology oriented, whereas he's much more like the business side of things. So he's the one that did all the fun. He's done all the fundraising for us. He's the one that has put together a lot of our go to market strategies, a lot of our business modeling. I've been more the one that's focused on building the product and the technology in the back end. And so, funny enough, like the way we always joke about it is he's very much like the Steve Jobs. Like, he has batshit crazy ideas left and right. And if you ever hear him speak, he has that very magnetic pull, that charisma. You hear so much about these guys. And then I'm much more so, I'll admit it, I'm not as smooth a talker as him, but when he has a crazy idea, I'm the one that starts to get to building it. And so it's a very complementary approach. And I think it's a competitive advantage that we're twins. The fact that we live together, we understand each other. Like, I know he doesn't have ulterior motives. I know our motives are aligned. The other thing is, like, we live together. So when we're working out, when we're playing Xbox at night, when we go to dinner, when we're driving to and from work, we're able to have so many side conversations that most founders that don't have that relationship could never have. And so I think it's an incredible blessing to work together. I think it's a massive competitive advantage. And I think we're really blessed to have two very different approaches, but also be similar in the sense that we have maniacal work ethic, very high level intensity, and so on.
That's awesome. I feel like people joke about how they want to take like the best of like certain people and like put them together in one person, and I feel like you guys have done that with your co-founding team naturally.
Yeah, you got. I mean, that is true. Like, where I'm weak, he's strong. Where he's weak, I'm strong. So there's definitely that case. And so I think we're very fortunate, and I think the performance of the company these last 2 years has really been because of that, because of how we work off one another.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess moving into kind of like Lula of today, it stemmed from kind of a problem that you were seeing as you were running this rental business. Would love to hear more about that journey to pivoting. And the other thing I noticed also is like it kind of coincided with the beginning of COVID, which obviously I'm sure impacted your business given it was so reliant on in person and community on college campuses. I'm curious how much of it was like strategic versus being driven by kind of the external macro forces that you couldn't have control over. But I thought that was a fascinating part of your story.
Yeah, I'll admit it. The whole COVID pandemic thing it's honestly more like a cute marketing story. So one of the things that happened
I
was,
respect you so much for
I
sharing
love
yeah,
that.
yeah.
like this will be like a good story. So when we when we got the early traction from like September 21, we were able to raise like $100,000 or 200,000, so like something small and something quick, and then that basically carried us up until April 2019. So April 2019, we're about to run out of capital, and we spend the last money that we have on one-way tickets to San Francisco. And everybody hears this story and they go, "Oh my God, you were so confident you were going to close your investors." Like, no, we literally cannot afford the flight back to Boston. And so we message 532 investors. The first 525 investors either pass, ignore us, don't want to talk to us. And investor 526 um, investor 526 responds and he's like, "Hey, can you come back like May 12th?" And I'm like, "No." I'm gonna go close this seed round this week in Boston. If you let me get on that plane, you lost the chance. I had just, by the way, I just finished watching Silicon Valley and seeing how Erdek negotiated. So I was trying to do that.
That's amazing.
That's
He's like, all
incredible.
right, if you can't come May 12th, like come May 5th. I'm like, I can't. I'm gonna go close this seed round this weekend. He's like, all right, can you come back like April 12th? I'm like, no, I can't. I'm gonna go close. He's like, all right, can you come tomorrow? We're having a fintech event. And so when he sends me this fintech invite, I'm like, motherfucker, we're shared mobility. There's no way it's worth my time going to this fintech event. So whatever, we end up going the next day and Michael gives a pitch and it wasn't his best pitch. And I remember texting my parents like it's over. And when he gets off stage, when he gets off stage, there's an investor waiting for him, and she's like, "Hey, Ali Reza wants to meet you." And so this is Ali Reza from Plug and Play. Shout out Plug and Play for being our first institutional capital. We go and we meet with Ali Reza, and Ali Reza basically tells us like, "Hey, what are you guys up to?" Blah blah blah. He was the one that I was corresponding with on email. So he's like, "If you stay next week, I'll line up a bunch of a bunch of firms that are worth talking to." And sure enough, he ended up lining up a few groups and we were able to raise a few $100,000. And that capital basically takes us to early 2020. And what happens towards the end of 2020, this was like a massive lesson. We got a group of like very notable high net worth individuals. And we started talking to them in August of 2020. And they basically told us, we're going to sign, we're going to give you this incredible valuation. Here's how much money we're going to give you. It was life-changing money for all of us. And as time started to go on, they start pushing it down like, oh yeah, we'll send the contract next week, or oh, so-and-so's out of town now, we'll send it next week, blah, blah, blah. And around December, Michael and I start to catch on to what they're doing, and we had naively stopped talking to all other investors. And so when we stopped talking to all the other investors, I guess they caught on, and they finally tell us like, "Hey, let's meet first week of January." And at this point, we're about to run out of capital, and we had to hire like 10 people. That was another thing. They came into our office. They told us to hire people. One of them actually signed the safe agreements for the terms. They were posting us on their LinkedIn, on their personal websites. So we were like, it's a done deal. So come early January, they come to our office, say hi to everybody that they had just told us to hire, and they walk us into the back room of our office and they tell us, congratulations, you've entered the trough of sorrow. And Michael and I'm like, what? Like, what do you mean? They're like, the deal we had before, scratch it. We're going to give you guys $1 million at a $2 million valuation. Take it or leave it. So Michael and I'm like, shit, like
Whoa.
we have this group of people outside that we just hired because of you guys, blah, blah. And again, there was a bunch of, at that moment, I placed all blame on them going back. Obviously, there was a bunch of stuff I could have done differently, but just two young, naive founders. And this was on a Tuesday, first Tuesday of 2020. That Saturday morning at 7:37 in the morning, they send us an email basically saying we're putting out of the deal. Good luck with everything. And that was basically it. And later on that week, Mike, when I would miss payroll for the first time, I had to go sell my car in order to pay everybody back. By the way, it's not like I had a badass car. It was a 2015 Ford. It was like Ford Focus.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't like it was a nice car or anything like that. It was just like scraps. And I had to sell it, and eventually we'd have to go off and we'd lay off the team. And then up until like March 2020, Mike and I were running that business basically on scraps, trying to make it. And it was crazy because throughout this time, we were growing like crazy. Everything was going really well on a users and usage basis, but everything else was just tanking. And so when college campuses shut down shut down because of COVID, that ultimately ends up killing the business. So Mike and I started trying to figure out what we're going to do with our life. And this was like a massive lesson because I wanted to send a message to all those investors saying, F you guys, you're whatever. I didn't. Towards the end of 2020, I get a call from one of those investors telling me, hey, I just got contracted as an advisor for the US military's car sharing program. They're trying to launch a car sharing program on military bases in Germany and the United States. The insurance companies want us to screen drivers, administer policies, and manage claims in a specific way. I've told them you have the technology to do it. Can you license it to them? And My brother and I'm like, yeah, sure, we'll do anything. By the way, we have this beautiful app. We'll white label them too. And they're like, no, we don't care about the app. We just want the insurance software, like the tools to run background checks, organize the policies on every rental, and manage the claims. And so we get on call with these guys from the military, and they ask us what it's going to cost. And I'm ready to say like $10,000 or $15,000. I'm the non-techie of the two. Michael tells them like $250,000. And I look at him and I tell him, you're an idiot. You just cost us the deal. The guy on the other side of the phone is like, oh man, if it were anything less, I'd be concerned. And I look at Mike when I said, mother effer, how bad did we just shoot ourselves in the foot? And we closed the deal right there on the call. And that was when we realized, like, oh man, this insurance infrastructure could actually be a big opportunity. And what we realized was that buyers of insurance, like shared economy platforms, trucking companies, car rental companies, even like a restaurant, if you're trying to run background checks on your employees, on your customers, if you're trying to organize all your insurance policies for your business, if you're trying to monitor the status of your claim, you only have two options. You build all that from the ground up, or you hack together a bunch of third party solutions. And so in that moment, we were like, man, what if somebody can provide all these insurance management tools from one singular base or one single API? And that was how we started the whole concept of LULA 2.0, which was this insurance infrastructure play. And then that's what we basically do today is we sell these insurance management tools to companies. And if you look at our Series A announcement versus our Series B, the Series A announcement was all API. And if you look at the Series B, it was much more of a platform approach. And the reason we ended up going the platform approach was because our customer base, we started realizing at a certain point, not only did they want access to the insurance management tools, but they also wanted to be able to get insurance from us. So we ended up building out a network of insurance carriers that they can procure insurance from. Or if they just wanted a technology piece, which most of them did, they can just get the technology from us as well. And so that was ultimately how LULA evolved into what it is today.
Wow. Wait, sorry, Mateo. Sorry to interrupt, but wait, Leo, are you hearing it on your end as well?
I think you're Mateo. Talk again right now.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Sorry, the last 10 seconds.
Oh, no, it's okay. Wait, say something again?
Talk again.
Did you hear me now?
Now it's normal.
Oh, now it's normal.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think our editor should be able to deal with that.
That should be fine.
But anyway, yeah. But
that should be good.
Cool. We can just.
Yeah. Continue. Oh, go ahead, Leo.
No, I mean, I was going to say that's an incredible journey. And so, the interesting part about it isn't like, or one of the many interesting things about it is that you have these founders from a founder market fit standpoint, like the car, rental sharing business, like makes a ton of sense, kind of scrappy. Y'all have figured it out, kind of been building it out of your own problem. And then you pivoted into something where, the going concern for investors and potentially even customers as well are like entrepreneurs that have like deep domain expertise in insurance and understanding it as such. And so just curious, like, how did you kind of like cross that boundary and thinking about like, okay, we were the founders who might have been like a really good natural fit for this initial business, and yet we're going to something completely different. We had to convince investors and customers that we were going to be the ones to be able to steward their money.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. It's something that we still run into today. Like we have almost 5,000 customers, and we work with some of the biggest insurance companies and insurance groups in the world. And I still, when I walk into places, sometimes people give me a weird look because it's not only that I'm younger, but I mean, I also like even just like dressing different. Like I'm always in a cap and I'm in a hoodie. Insurance is very much like blazer, button down, and all that. And so I still get that play, but I think the thing that Michael and I always realize and we always focus on was like, if we build a really good product, people will typically put their biases aside, especially because take a step back, it's a B2B product. And when it's B2B, we've realized if you save people money or you make people money, they're going to almost always pay attention to you because that's their job. It's to increase the fiscal responsibility of the company. And so that was one of the things that we realized early on is like if we can build a truly incredible product that actually helps people, they're going to pay attention, especially if it saves them money or it helps them make money. That said, Michael and I were very self-aware that when we were going into this industry, we had to learn how to talk the industry. And so I went out and I got my insurance licenses. I took insurance courses. I went onto YouTube and Spotify, and I listened to every insurance podcast I could so that I would be able to learn how to talk in the industry. And then one of the other things that we did was once we raised a little bit of capital, we would actually go to expert networks, and I would pay to get on call with experts of like different companies from different backgrounds and ask them a list of questions and just hear the words that they use, the phrases, the way that they talked. And then once we got some serious money on our end, one of the things that we did was we actually started to bring people from the insurance industry. And so if you look at the overall makeup of the company, it's overwhelmingly majority people from like the tech and startup world, but we made sure to bring a handful of people from reputable companies in the insurance space so that we always had that credibility. And so now when I walked into a meeting with one of the big carriers, yes, it might be me that's leading the conversation. I'm a little bit unorthodox for an executive in an insurance or in a company within the world of insurance, but I have people that give them a level of comfort and that are aligned with us so that they say, hey, if the CEO of Assurance America or if the former operations manager for CSA trusts this individual, then I probably should too. And so those were some of the ways that we overcame it. But again, I'll be honest, I still run into those issues all the time where I'm trying to sell something. It's like, why am I going to listen to you? I've been in insurance longer than you've been alive. And so it's something that we still deal with.
For sure. And the interesting irony of it all is that if you look at insurtech in the past couple of years, like there's been it's been really tough for a lot of companies. And so I think one of the things that's kind of interesting is that y'all coming at it from a different, approach and mindset and whatnot, and kind of doing so well and off to the great start that y'all are off to, I think is also a testament to perhaps needing essentially like a different perspective on the industry, because obviously some of these folks with like the quote unquote perfect backgrounds to start companies, a lot of those companies have failed. So I think there's also something interesting in kind of being able to come at a problem from a different perspective as well.
I think the other thing too is we approached the insurtech market from really a true technology perspective. And so
Right.
it was funny because I saw somebody tweet about yesterday, like the insurtech market is in a flux, blah, blah.
Yeah,
And I wanted to respond like, you just listed 6 or 7 companies on your post, and not a single one of them are a technology company. Like Lemonade, Hippo, Root, they're referred to as insurtechs, and I don't understand why. They are all insurance companies that take balance sheet risk and pay claims. To call them an insurtech is the equivalent of calling Bank of America a fintech because they have a mobile app. And that's
Yeah.
not a shot against Lemonade, Root, or Hippo. Like, I studied the founders of those companies maniacally. I still have so much respect for what they tried to build, but at the end of the day, when they go into the public markets, they're not getting looked at as like, oh, they have an 80% gross margin product. Like, no, they have a loss ratio, they have a combined ratio, they have investment dollars they have to put to play. So like, those are not insurtechs. And I think one of the reasons why we've had any success is because we truly came at it from a technology for insurance perspective. I didn't have an actuarial background. I didn't have a broker background or an underwriter background. The only background that I had was building software. And so when we were coming up with solutions, that's where my mindset was from. I'd see certain things and I'd be like, wait, why is this done like this? I can just write a script that's going to automate this over the course of the weekend. Whereas somebody that came from an insurance background would be like, oh, I was taught to do it like this. It must be that it has to be done like this. And I think that's one of the big things that really allowed, to your point, like absolutely the fact that we didn't come from the industry, I think has been one of our biggest advantages.
Wow. The other thing that strikes me from hearing your story is it's very clear you're like top 0.1% at like learning new things and very quickly, and also with a lot of scrappiness. Do you have any like advice or tricks? Or I'm sure some of it's just like brute forcing it and working really hard, but I find that also really fascinating and inspiring.
I think the biggest thing for me is like, and it's actually a great anecdote. My brother was the one that pointed it out. Most millionaires that I know are not big readers. Every single billionaire that I've ever met is a voracious reader. And for me, that was one of the things that I realized early on in my career was that the most successful people I would come across, they were all voracious readers, which meant they were all voracious learners. And so that was a big thing for me was like, I was going to become the most curious person in the world. And if you ever see me in like in a conversation where I'm on the other side, I'm not the one talking, the question that I ask people all the time is why, why? The other thing is I take a very Socratic method approach to everything. And people think it's me being condescending. It's not. It's me trying to genuinely learn from the very first principles why things are done a certain way. And I'd say the other thing too is my brother and I both played basketball growing up, and we both had the chance to play college basketball, which is shocking if you ever see our size. We're on a good day 5'9", 150 pounds. And one of the things that we always approached it was like when Kobe wanted to get like Michael Jordan in terms of skill set, he had game film that he got to watch. I want to be this generation's Elon, this generation's Zuck, Bezos, but I don't have game film that I can watch on those guys. My version of game film is their autobiographies. And so one of the things that I've done to really learn is I study maniacally the autobiographies of not just the mainstream founders that I spoke about, but like founders that people don't think about, like D Hawk, Gaston Glock, Estee Lauder, Coco Chanel, Whitney Wolf, like all these different people. And I think, again, one of the things I saw with them was like they have a voracious need to learn. And so I wanted to mimic that exact thing. So I make it a point that I'm constantly reading. I give myself a certain amount of time on a weekly basis to make sure that I'm learning. And the other thing is like I'm very self-aware that there's a lot of stuff that I don't know. I got humbled tremendously early on in my career. And so that's also a reason why I become so maniacal about learning as much as possible, because I realized how little I knew. And so that just fed my curiosity and made sure that my goal when I walked into a room was no longer be the smartest person there, but the most curious. And I think that mindset's also what allowed me to get so good at learning, particularly in a rapid pace.
Awesome. I also really appreciated, in your TechCrunch article about your fundraising round, like the very last paragraph is basically a quote from you guys saying how it's been a very long journey. And even in this interview, you've been super candid about the fact that it may have started off more slowly and that it's, it seems like an overnight success now, but it's built on top of years and years of hard work. I'm curious if you have advice for folks who are just starting out, especially like first-time founders. You kind of mentioned some of the stories that you went through, that investor group, and I'm sorry that even happened to you. And I'm sure there's so many lessons that you could provide, but do any come top of mind to kind of like pass on to the next generation of founders?
I think the biggest thing for me is just like if you believe in something, go all. I'm gonna curse. So apologies if I can't curse, but I have to say like
You can curse.
We're very pro cursing.
Yeah, no worries.
if you believe in something, go all fucking in on it, and like make a self covenant that come hell or high water, you're gonna continue to go on. Because I think about it's a great quote that Keith Raboy has. It's like product market fit isn't found, it's forged. And I'm an affirmative believer of that. And there's so many great quotes about it. It's like Paul Graham has another one where it's like if you stay around for 4 or 5 years, something magical happens. If you're able to just break through the noise of those first couple of years, it's like something magical happens, something just clicks, something happens. And that was one of the things, like I can't tell you how many times I got told a car sharing app was a stupid idea, that it wasn't necessary, blah, blah. But if that was the case, it wouldn't have become a top 100 app on an app store with no marketing budget in 8 days. Like, I can't tell you how many times people told me, like, nobody's going to take you serious with their insurance tech. Nobody's going to want to talk to you, all this different stuff. Well, we grew almost 50x in the last 18 months. I think that might be the fastest growing insurtech ever. Like, I don't know if anybody else has ever done that. But again, it took me 7 years to get to this point. And so for me, like, it's just, there's a lot. Every startup at this point has smart people. Every startup at this point has people that work hard. The ones that are really going to make it are the ones that just like come hell or high water, refuse to quit. And it sounds so cliche. That's like my best advice. Like, make a self covenant with yourself that no matter how bad things get, you're going to continue to go. And if you're able to last like 3 or 4 years, there's going to be something magical that happens. And again, like to quote someone else, Jay-Z said it. The only smart thing we did was kept going. And that's like, it's cliche, but that's by far the most impactful advice I can get is like, do not quit under any circumstance. Because if you can make it to that 3 or 4 year mark, something magical is bound to happen.
How do you think about keeping like the stubbornness and the come hell or high water attitude, which is incredible, with also the fact that like y'all did pivot from something that was like kind of working, potentially had some outcome there as well too. So how do you think about like, you know, the kind of stubbornness on one side of the aisle, but also like knowing when to, you know, like juke and jive around an insight as opposed to just getting stuck with something that you were working on to begin with?
So I think one of the big things for me is like, I never fell in love with a business. I fell in love. It sounds cliche. Like I never fell in love with a business. I fell in love with like the end goal. The end goal for me was building something that really impacted people's lives. So when the car sharing app didn't necessarily work out, I wasn't in love with that business. I was in love with the idea of like building something that's going to impact millions of lives. So it's like, all right, this didn't necessarily work out for whatever reasons. I still, with this new idea, I can still impact millions of lives by providing insurance infrastructure and making it more accessible. So for me, that was a big thing. One of the other things that's helped me throughout this journey is, again, going back to I like to consider myself a historian of business, just studying all these autobiographies and these founders. One of the big things that I realize is every single one of them were forced to go through a pivot. And so while most people would get frustrated or maybe they'd lose any level of excitement because like, oh man, I have to go through this really tough period, I looked at it as more as like, this is my right. Elon Musk had to pivot at one point. Zuck had to change a bunch of stuff. Steve Jobs, like I've kept this company alive long enough that I've made it to the glorious point where I need to pivot. Like, oh, this is actually an accomplishment for me. And so by being a historian, that's how I started approaching things. And like Brian Chesky's How I Built This episode, that episode changed my life because I remember, and he had another great podcast with Lenny that just came out like a few days ago. That also changed my life too. But like, I remember studying Brian. Like Brian is one of the founders that I look up to and I have so much respect for. And he's so transparent in his interviews. And I remember in the interview with How I Built This, he's talking about the struggle, the self-doubt. And I remember thinking to myself, I was like, wait, if this founder, this level of business person is having these doubts and going through these issues, how can I expect not to have them either? And then I just read the Elon book not too long ago. He had a lot of the same doubts. And so when it comes to like the stubbornness of making an idea work, when you read these books, you realize that they all went through the same thing. And so I shouldn't be stubborn and think that I have to stick with a business because I'm going to be a failure if I don't. Reading these books makes you realize like the great success comes from not keeping with one idea, but knowing when to pivot. And that's just helped me in terms of realizing like, hey, maybe it's time to start looking at other opportunities or other places or something like that. And like Phil Knight has another great quote, which I'm about to butcher. Stopping does not mean quitting. And so that's another great thing that always stays in my mind is that just because I decide to stop on a certain initiative because it's not generating the particular ROI I want doesn't necessarily mean I'm quitting either. And so again, just having all those different anecdotes from all the greats has been something that's helped me avoid being too stubborn and has helped me not fall too in love with a business idea and get it to a point where I refuse to move on from it.
Yeah, that resonates so much. Just the feeling, or just having reminders that what you're feeling is not rare. Like you kind of mentioned earlier, like dropping out of school and wondering if you were stupid. And I feel like I've resonated a lot with that. And so I find that really fascinating that you've been able to find those examples and use that as inspiration to kind of turn around what otherwise could be a really negative mindset given all the things that you've been through on your journey. So that's really awesome to hear.
I mean, you have to have that mindset. Like I think about it all the time. I see founders get frustrated because they can't raise X number of dollars or whatever. It's like I tell them, it's like being able to raise $1 million from a stranger is not normal. What is normal is not being able to raise that $1 million from a stranger. Like let's not forget Twitter and TechCrunch headlines are not the real world.
Yep.
What's not normal is raising at a $2 billion valuation right out of the gates. What is normal is struggling to ever hit that $2 billion valuation. And so that's one of the other things too. Like that's one of the reasons why I love autobiographies is because the people that truly made it at the top, they take a pride in their struggle. And so that's why whenever I see one of these founders or one of these people like trying to make their journey look perfect, I'm like, oh, they're not a true business person. There's something probably broken back there, because you read the autobiographies of all the greats, they have that struggle as a sense of pride. And that's what I try to tell young founders now. Like, if you can't get a $10 million valuation for your idea just because you went through Y Combinator, like, that's not something to be sad about. Like, that's actually normal. The $30 million pre-money valuation on an idea is not normal. Don't get it twisted. And most people, they don't have that perspective because they haven't read the books or they haven't taken the time to study. And so that's the thing that I try to drill into people's minds when I talk to them, is like, all this success, all this stuff happening so quick, it's not normal. Like, I was walking around New York last night and I was seeing Fabletics, Alo, and all these different companies that feel like they popped out of nowhere. Raising Cane's too. You go onto Wikipedia and you search up when they were started. They're all like 20 years old, 10 years old companies, but they feel like they happened overnight. But again, most people don't do they don't study the history of the game. And so that's why they get so frustrated. But it's crazy. If you just took 5 minutes to read up on these companies, you'd realize that the struggle is far more normal than the business that was launched without any.
Athletic Greens, I feel like fits that category too. Like, over COVID, somehow popped up overnight, but actually it's like a decade-old plus company. It's kind of amazing.
Exactly.
That's amazing. I guess my other question before we pivot back and kind of finalize like Lula and hearing more about what you have planned for the next year and then the future vision, kind of speaking to like, feeling comforted by other founder stories, I guess. Like, something that I love about living in New York is there are lots of founders here who are also working on companies. And so I feel like I have, despite being a solo founder myself, a lot of comfort in those relationships and being able to learn from folks who are at my stage or slightly ahead. I'm curious what it's like building in Miami. People obviously got a lot of hype during COVID, and you guys grew up there as well. I'm curious of your honest take about what you like or don't like about being a founder there.
There's some parts of it that are a little bit frustrating, like the engineering talent and stuff like that is not where it needs to be. And I don't think that's necessarily an issue with people. I just think it's like the way the school curriculum and stuff is built. In Miami, just technology was not something people prioritized when I was growing up, or even up until recently. And it takes time to change that. And so it's been frustrating because you want to be able to build an incredible business from your hometown. You want to be able to recruit everybody from your hometown and stuff like that. But it's just admittedly been harder on the technical side of things. Like, there's a reason why we have an office in Palo Alto. But in terms of building a company, I think it's been phenomenal, because one of the things that I really like about Miami is you have the Latin American culture and mindset embedded into the city. And one of the things that happens is, if you try to go raise money in Latin America or build a business in Latin America, good luck building a business in Latin America where you're losing money the first 3, 4, 5, 10 years. Like, over there, if you want to get a business, you have to either bootstrap it or get it profitable almost on day one. And the people that we recruit on the business side from there, they have that mindset. The business people that I get to meet and learn from in Miami have that mindset of, hey, maybe I didn't hit $100 million in 5 years of my business, like a VC-backed company, but my company's 20 years old, does $20 million. I'm the sole owner. I net 25% of that. Like, a lot of these guys run circles around us, even if their businesses are much smaller. And it's because they have such a different mindset that they might not be startup founders, but they're still founders and executives at incredible businesses. And so I love it because you're still surrounded by incredibly successful people, but they bring such a different perspective. You're able to learn from them too. And so, like, probably the most impactful conversation I've ever had as a business person came from a big real estate developer. He looked at our business one day, and he was like, you guys should approach software the way we do in real estate. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, we don't have to raise equity. We get to leverage debt a lot. And the reason we get to leverage debt is because we have 12-month leases, which means 12-month of guaranteed revenue. That sounds quite similar, like a 12-month SaaS contract. And so for us, that you're constantly thinking equity raise, but you take lessons from other people and you're like, wait, there's different vehicles that I could use. And so for me, that's what I love about being in Miami is you're not going to find yourself a bunch of other tech people where you can ask like, hey, how did you scale your backend infrastructure in X way? but you're going to get completely different perspectives on how to build tremendous businesses. And it's super refreshing to be able to disconnect and get another viewpoint on how to build something.
Very cool. And I guess, Leo, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, in terms of kind of wrapping up on the Lula end, just curious from your perspective, what's kind of in store for the next 5 years? Saw y'all tease something in the kind of AI adjacencies, and even though AI is, can be an overhyped term in certain cases, actually insurance seems like a really good use case for kind of LLM. So I'm curious how you're thinking about the next 5 years for Lula, and maybe even thinking about AI specifically.
Yeah, I think the world of I think the world of insurance specifically needs a company focused on building insurance specific AI, and so I'm super excited that LULA is in a position to be that company. One of the incredible things about the incumbents, what they did is a lot of their data came from just scraping all the free information off the internet. But if you think about it, information that's free on insurance on the internet is not necessarily the highest quality. And so having a company like Lula that's focused on building language models specifically trained off insurance information and that's going state by state, I think gives us a tremendous opportunity. I think the other thing too is like my long-term vision is for Lula to be the biggest company in the world of insurance. And so I envision a world one day where we're providing the infrastructure so that there's insurance companies without any humans. Like I can envision a world 20, 30 years from now where there's AI that's calling people to sell insurance, calling people to service them, doing all the actuarial and underwriting work. And so like essentially autonomous insurance companies. Like I see a world where that's possible with this new technology. And I see a world where Lula is the one that's powering those types of functionalities and those capabilities. And so it's a little bit different from what we're doing today. We very much service the buyers of insurance. But I think going forward, you're going to see us also start to really service the sellers of insurance. And I really believe that 20, 30 years from now, you're not only going to see autonomous insurance companies here in the United States, you're going to see it all over the world, and they're going to be powered by Lula.
That's awesome. I've never been so excited about learning about an insurance business before. So.
Yeah, same.
It's great. Leo, do you want to wrap us up with some quick rapid fire?
Absolutely. So rapid fire is meant to be answered in kind of one sentence or less. And I'll start with the founder you look up to most.
Estée Lauder.
What's a 1-2 sentence reason why?
She wanted to touch 50 faces a day and be the person that touched the most faces of all time because she was makeup. And so I think, how can I bring those inputs into my business and be the person in insurance that talks to the most people, builds the highest quality products, all of that. And so her go-to-market approach is something that I study and I steal every day.
Love that. Book that most changed your life.
Shoe Dog by Phil Knight.
Great one.
Yeah. What job would you want if you couldn't be a founder?
NBA player.
Yeah, me too. But my problem is I'm just slow and unathletic, so that's going to be an issue. Favorite account, whether that's a newsletter, Twitter account, or IG meme account?
Founders Podcast. They're technically a podcast, but they have an Instagram and a Twitter, which I both follow.
Yeah. David Center is fucking great. First entrepreneurial endeavor.
Selling fruits in shopping malls.
And then finally, the mega trend you're most excited about, whether that's in insurance or outside, up to you.
I'd say the transition from boomers getting rid of their businesses, and so there's gonna be like this massive wave of boomers offing trillions of dollars worth of enterprise value into this next generation. I'm super excited to see how that plays out and how this next generation modernizes a lot of those unsexy businesses.
Oh, that's a really good one. Love that. Well, thank you so much for being on, Mateo. This has been so fun, and I learned a ton. So anyway, thank you for the time. Really
absolutely, Mateo. I think everyone in the world needs a little of Mateo attitude juice. I think it's incredible, kind of hearing your story and kind of the fight and the curiosity that you continue to show.
Of course, I appreciate you guys having me on. This was a blast, and thank you so much, by the way, for actually taking the time to do homework beforehand.
Of course.
Such an incredible job guiding this this podcast you've I actually had to stop doing podcasts for a period of time because most of them were such shit experiences. But
we'll take it. No, this is great.
Steph and I are happy to kind of hop over that low bar for sure. Because I hear you. I've heard the same.